Hi to all. Welcome back to our Bible study. We've got a really interesting chapter today in Isaiah chapter 24. And I've got to admit something that I'm not sure I've ever had to say on this channel with any of these chapters, and that is that I don't currently have a working interpretation of Isaiah 24. The reason for that is because I spent several days on this now, and I've been trying to compare it to what we've already studied and looking at what's coming in the future and trying to figure out, it's like, well, okay, what is Isaiah talking about here? And I'm not the only one who's struggled with this one. There's a number of commentators from a variety of backgrounds and theological beliefs that have tackled this, and I've read their stuff, and I can't find any singular interpretation of this chapter that I really love and that sits well with me without having to force some verses into things that maybe I don't really think they're intended to say. And there are some views that the text seems to fit really well with. There's some verses in the chapter that seem to fit a certain view really well, and then you go towards the end of the chapter and you find another set of verses, and it's like, it kind of blows up your interpretation, and vice versa with almost all of the views. And so we're going to talk about at the end of the chapter in our application section, what do you do when you come to a chapter or a passage of scripture that you can't really make sense of? Because that's the situation that I'm in, and we'll talk about, like, where do we go from here? What do we do with this? We just skip it and move on, or is there more to it? But let's talk about the information that's in this chapter on like a surface level, and then we'll get to our application at the end. So in previous chapters, God has used Isaiah to prophesy his judgments on particular nations. But here, the whole earth is in view and is going to be the recipient of God's judgment. So that's kind of the high-level theme here. As far as timeline, we don't have a specific date for when Isaiah spoke or recorded this prophecy. Going down to our key characters, we have Isaiah, who is the author, and then we have just the earth here, kind of in general. The earth is the object of God's judgment, and this could refer to the whole earth, to, every nation, but scholars say that the term can also be translated the land. And that's part of the difficulty of figuring out exactly what's going on here. This may indicate that Isaiah was talking about only Israel and Judah and their surrounding neighbors, because you'll notice that in the previous chapters where we've called out all these nations, we have Israel and Judah kind of in the middle, and then we have all the nations around them on what would have been to them most of the known world. And so pretty much we've called out all the nations around Israel. Is that what's being referred to here by the term earth, or is it really talking about everything, every nation and all that God has created? There is one term that I want to take a closer look at for our definition section. It's in verse 5. It's everlasting covenant. Now you might be thinking, well, what exactly is this referring to? There is not a singular covenant in the Bible that is referred to as the everlasting covenant versus all of the others, right? There's several that are referred to as an eternal, an everlasting covenant, or a covenant forever. God's promise to Noah not to flood the earth in Genesis 9, God's covenant with Abraham and his descendants, Genesis 17, God's promise to Israel and the priests in Leviticus, God's promises to David to establish his throne forever, 2 Samuel 23, and also God's promises through Jesus in the New Covenant are referred to that way, Hebrews 13, verse 20. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get into the text. We have 23 verses, God's judgment over all the earth. God promised that he was going to empty the earth and make it desolate. Now, there would still be some individuals on the earth. And there's a discussion here. I'll give you some of the kind of the major popular interpretations of this passage. Some people think that it's referring to just Israel and Judah and the land around them, and that is what God is referring to as the earth. He's now speaking to all these nations that he's been speaking to individually up to this point. And so this is about how God is going to judge all of them and this whole territory of the world. Another view is that this is actually talking about the end of the world. God's day of judgment on all people. And there's some verses towards the end of the chapter that really seem to suggest something like that. There's another interpretation that the desolation of the earth here or the emptying of the earth and the destruction of judgment of the earth is actually just the sinful world being conquered by the gospel in the time of Jesus. So I'd say those are some of the most popular ideas here, and you can judge them for yourself as we go through here. But again, it seems like with every one of these interpretations, there's some verses that don't fit, and that's what makes it really difficult. So God promises to empty the earth and to make it desolate. The powerful men of the earth would be humbled, and there would be no distinction between them and a slave. The earth would mourn, languish, wither, and be emptied out because of the judgment of God. It says that the earth was going to be afflicted by a curse. I think that's sin. A curse brought about by its inhabitants ignoring the laws of God and the everlasting covenant. Isaiah prophesied that the earth would be scorched and that few men would be left. Now, in those days, there would be no reason to rejoice, no occasion to drink wine or to make merry with instruments or anything like that. It's going to be sad times. The cities of the earth are described as desolate, and the gates of those cities are in ruins, and the cities will be bare like olive trees after they've been harvested. The righteous who remain on the earth would praise God. The wicked who remained would be snared and fall into a pit. The earth would be like a drunk man that stumbled, and it would never rise again. And then I just want to read the last 2-3 verses here of the chapter because they're really interesting. On that day, the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven and the kings of the earth on the earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners in a pit. They will be shut up in a prison, and after many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be confounded and the sun ashamed, for the Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and his glory will be before his elders. So just to give you an idea of how I was wrestling with this text, you see that God's going to bring judgment on the earth is going to be afflicted. He talks about the desolation of the cities, and the gates are in ruins, and the people are there, but there's no reason to rejoice. That could very well be fulfilled in the conquering of the land by the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the ruins that they left behind them and the people that they left desolate. But then you go down to the end of the chapter and you see God punishing the hosts of heaven. He says the hosts of heaven in the ESV, English Standard Version, seems to maybe indicate the end of time. And of course, just the whole idea of punishing the entire earth or bringing the entire earth into judgment obviously brings to our minds scenes of the final judgment day when God will render justice to all people. But then the text indicates that there are still people on the earth, and there are still righteous and wicked people on the earth. And so what do we make of that? But then if you try to understand the fulfillment as something that was going to happen, under the time period of the Assyrians or the Babylonians, then you have to take the assumption that the whole earth referred to here is just land. And that's an assumption in and of itself. So it's a challenging chapter. And again, it's like I don't actually have a functional working interpretation of it. So what do we do with it? That's what we want to talk about in our application section. What do we do when we can't understand a part of the Bible that we read? Should we just skip it and say, well, that's too hard, I'm not going to think about it, I'm just going to keep reading? Should we just accept the interpretation of maybe our favorite Bible teacher, even if that interpretation doesn't sit particularly well with us? We think they're assuming too many things or certain puzzle pieces don't fit. Well, I think the best thing that we can do is to study the passage, as we've done today, familiarize ourselves with the themes, with the language, with the ideas, and see if those phrases appear elsewhere in the Bible, and then file that information away in your mind, or put in your back pocket, because it could be that you'll come across information in the future that shines light on the mysterious passage. Many people have said the Bible is its own best interpreter, it's its own best commentary, but sometimes it takes a while to connect the dots. Sometimes it's only after we familiarize ourselves with more information that we're able to come back to a chapter like this and kind of slot it in where it goes in our overall understanding of the Bible. Sometimes the best way to understand a passage is just to keep reading and then come back to that passage at a later date. And so that's what I'm going to be doing with Isaiah 24. You are not going to get some kind of forced interpretation out of me just so I can look like I am a scholar or am smart, or just because that's my responsibility as the teacher. If I don't know, I'm just going to tell you that I don't know. And this is one that I don't know. So we'll store it away, and hopefully maybe by the time we're done with the entire Bible, and especially the prophets, we will be able to come back to it and understand it a little bit better. Okay, so that's our study for today in chapter 24. If you do have any thoughts or interpretations, or you've heard an interpretation that you really like, leave it down in the comment section. I'd be interested in checking it out, because as I mentioned, I looked through and read a variety of people on this, and I'm not convinced I've found the right conclusion yet, or the right interpretation. So if you've found one that you think really fits really well, let me know down in the comment section.